Hey, 8th graders, we're going to start out today with some shout-outs from this weekend. The first shout-out is going to Youth Run NOLA. Huge shout-out to you guys. Had your first race this Saturday, so shout-out to Asia, Tyreek, Darren, Diamond, and Brandy. You guys did an awesome job. You represented DTA at a race where there are thousands of people there. So huge shout-out to you, and a special double shout-out goes to Darren Mingo because he had the fastest time out of DTA, getting first place from DTA with a time of 14 minutes and 30 seconds. You rock. So let's continue this shout out. Here's a quick clip from this weekend.
When I say no, you say no, no, no. I say you say no, you. I say no, you say no, no, no. I say you say no, you. I say no, you say no, no.
All right. So what we are going to do today is order numbers from least to greatest. We're going to start with these decimal points. I have 3 decimals, and I want to order from smallest to biggest. I'm going to start with these 2 first and compare them, and then compare the last one. So in order to compare decimals, I need to compare place values. It's not necessarily the number of digits that you have, but which digits are largest in which place values. So the first thing I did is I lined up my decimals here, and I took my first 2 numbers in order to compare them. I'm going to start with my ones place value. My ones place value is right here. I want to look at these 2 numbers and decide which is bigger, or if they are the same. Well, 0 and 0 are the same, so that place value right now is equivalent. I need to move to the next place value. I now want to take a look at my tenths place value. I have a 7 and I have a 6. I want to compare which number is larger in my tenths place value, the 7 or the 6. Well, the 7 is larger, so that makes my number 0.72 or 0 and 72 hundredths larger than 0 and 685 thousandths. Even though 685 has more digits, the 6, the 8, and the 5, than the 72 hundredths, because the 7 is larger in the tenths place value, 0 and 72 hundredths is larger. So I'm going to go ahead and start to kind of plot that. I have my least and greatest. I know that I can write 0 and 72 hundredths here, and I know that 0 and 685 thousandths is smaller. Now I want to see where my number 0.9 or 0 and 9 tenths falls. So let's compare 0 and 9 tenths to 0 and 72 hundredths. Now, a common mistake that a lot of people in 6th, 7th grade will be making is they're going to think, oh, 72, this 72 looks larger than 9, so 72 hundredths must be bigger. That's not necessarily the case. We want to compare place values. So let's look at our ones place value. The ones place value is the same, so I need to move to the next place value. Which is larger, my 7 or my 9? Well, 9 is larger. I have more tenths in the numbers 0 and 9 tenths than 0 and 72 hundredths. So 0 and 9 tenths is larger than 0 and 72 hundredths, even though 72 looks bigger. So when I go ahead and order that, I have my least and my greatest. I'm going to put 0 and 9 tenths in the greatest slot. Cool, now that we got decimals down, let's do it to combine with decimals and fractions. So what makes this tricky and what makes this type of problem hard is that we have fractions and we have decimals, and those are difficult to compare as is. So what we need to do is we need to take our fractions and let's make them into decimals to make this easier to compare. So I'm going to start off with I'm going to start off with 6 sevenths, and I'm just going to move this over. I'm going to make 6 sevenths into a decimal. I can make 6 sevenths into a decimal by dividing. The top number goes in, my bottom number goes out. This is review from Thursday of last week. Does 7 go into 6? No, it goes in 0 times. I need to add a decimal point and a 0, and now I can see how many times does 7 go into 60. Well, 7 goes into 60 8 times. 8 times 7 is 56. I want to subtract 60 minus 56 gives me 4. I can add another 0 and bring it down. 7 goes into 40 5 times. 5 times 7 is 35. I subtract and I get a 5. I can continue to bring down, but I think that this will give me enough information to be able to order the pairs, or order the numbers from least to greatest. So I'm going to go ahead and move over, and we know that 6/7 is equal to 85 hundredths, so I'm going to go ahead and write that. This is 0.85. Now I have one more problem. I have one more fraction right here that I need to make into a decimal. So I'm going to do that over here. Let's make 5/8 into a decimal. 5/8 we can make into a decimal by dividing. 5 divided by 8. Does 8 go into 5? No, it does not. So that's 0 times. I can add a decimal and a 0. I'll bring my decimal point up top too. 8 goes into 50. 6 times. 6 times 8 is 48. And I can subtract 50 minus 48 is going to give me 2. I will add a 0. Remember, we don't want to make that super silly mistake. A lot of people try to take this 2 and bring it up. We need to add a 0 so we can bring it down. So I'll bring down my 0. 8 goes into 20. That happens 2 times. 2 times 8 is 16. Subtract. Again, I can continue to go, and some of us might know this right away. The next one's gonna help us out and give us exactly 5. But sometimes you can also just pause where you are at. So we know that this is 0 and 62 hundredths, or I can finish it off the 0.625. So let's go ahead and move over and make sure we have that recorded. This is the same as 625 thousandths. So now I want to take my numbers and I want to compare them. So I have a bunch of decimals now. Let's compare the size of my decimals. Which is larger, 0.85 or 0.7? Well, I want to look in the tenths place value. The 8 is larger than the 7. So I know that 0.85 or 6/7 is larger than 0.7. Go ahead and record that because I know that my 0.85, which is the same as 6/7, so I know that my 6/7 was greater than my 0.7. There's my first starting point. Let's compare the other numbers. We have 5/8, so I want to compare, is 5/8 larger or smaller than 7/10? Well, I have a 7 in the tens place value and a 6 in the tenths place value. So 0 and 7/10 is larger than 0.625. Even though this looks bigger because there's more digits, the 7 in the tenths place value is larger than the 6 in the tenths place value. So let's go ahead and record that. 0 and 5/8 or 0.625 is smaller than 0.7. So I'm going to put 5/8 under smaller, or on the lesser side, the least side. And I have one left to compare. It's 0 and 9/10. 0 and 9/10. Let's look back at our numbers. Our largest number was 6/7, which we said was the same thing as 0.85. So we want to see, is 0.9 larger or smaller than 0.85? Well, 0.9 has a 9 in the tenths place value. This has an 8 in the tenths place value. That means that 0.9 is larger. So let's go ahead and record our largest number of these three is 0 and 9/10. I have them written from least to greatest. Last thing I want to review real quick before you go into your packet and you get to do the rest of your worksheet is just talking about rational versus irrational numbers. Remember, rational numbers are all fractions, and we know that fractions become decimals that either repeat, they can end, or they have some sort of pattern that goes on forever. On the other hand, irrational numbers are imperfect square roots, so something you can't find the perfect square root of, anything that includes pi. And so irrational numbers are also decimals that go on forever without a pattern. You have the rest of your packet to do. Bring it up to you when you finish. Good luck.